This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Tobias Dengel. He is the author of a book called The Sound of the Future, The Coming Age of Voice Technology. Now, you got to know, someone like me, that's a topic, that's an author that I just have to dig into because so much of my life involves voice, whether it's this podcast, whether it's my audiobooks, whether it's me talking to Siri on some Apple device, whether it's me using Google Translate to communicate in a foreign language. It's a topic near and dear to me. It's going to be a topic near and dear to all of us. All you need is a pulse and a little imagination. And listen to this episode, and you're going to understand why voice tech is going to be huge and is going to change our lives 100%. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation with Tobias Dengel and learn about the coming age of voice tech. I hope you enjoy.
You grew up in Virginia. I see you went to George Mason. My brother went there. I know a lot of people that went to school there.
I did. I grew up in Vienna, actually.
I grew up in Front Royal. Now I'm in Charlottesville.
You're in Charlottesville right now?
Yeah, that's where our company is.
Let's see. Gosh, I don't know. The middle of September, I was touring Monticello and the UVA campus.
Oh, nice.
Back in Southeast Asia at this moment, though.
How did you like Monticello? I'm actually on the board there, so I spend a lot of time trying to work with that place.
I'm a big fan. I asked my father, he said we were there when I was a kid. I'm in my 50s, but I did not recall that drive. We didn't take the normal highway you would come from Northern Virginia.
29.
Not on 29. It took us to some small mountain road through various farms and whatnot. That was really cool. I'd never done that drive before. It took us through the city of Orange, I believe. And so that was really cool.
Exactly. I go up to DC probably once a month, and a lot of times it'll route me through that if the traffic on 29 is busier, and it's a beautiful drive.
It really is, especially, I was doing it in September, and it's probably even more pretty now with some of the leaves changing, but the weather was blue skies. We got really lucky. It was nice.
That's great.
Small world, but Monticello, very nice. Great experience. I don't know, what's the takeaway? At first, it looks a little smaller than you might imagine, but then you start walking around, you realize it's quite large. It's not so small. So it's an amazing man. Just to see where he was and what he understood so many centuries ago, it's like, wow. You just walk away with a big wow.
You walk away with a big wow, and obviously very complicated given slavery and his relationship with Sally Hemings and having 4 of his own kids with Sally that he then had as slaves until they were, I think, either 18 or 21, but at the same time, such a visionary. We're really trying to position it as the American story. The ideals are extraordinary and the work is extraordinary and what he built was extraordinary, but it wasn't perfect.
No, it wasn't perfect. I think sometimes, though, we in our modern times use our same prism today, which might be a little unfair. Frankly, if we look around the world today, there are many hot spots in this world where slavery still exists. So it's quite unfortunate.
100%.
Well, cool stuff. Let me jump right in with give you where I sit in my understanding. And we're going to jump right in terms of how to see what's coming. So if I was to share with you my understanding of audio or voice, okay, clearly I use my voice in this podcast. That's one issue. I see that my audiobooks have done exceptionally well in the last 6-7 years, something that did not exist in the first 10 years, let's say, of my publishing history. I demonstrated for a friend the other day on an Apple HomePod that if I said, "Hey, Siri, who is Michael Covel?" it read my Wikipedia entry. I thought, well, that's really nifty. I know there's all kinds of other things that one can do with the Siris and the Alexas and stuff like that. And I guess the last thing I would say in terms of my understanding of voice, and I'm not trying to be too self-deprecating here, but if I call any bank, I know right now in terms of the technology, I will bypass every bit of voice technology I can possibly bypass that any bank has set up because it all is terrible. I will either yell agent or press the 0 for an operator. So that's my understanding of where we are today. Now, I want you to give me the pivot. When is the pivot moment? And then we're going to start to unpack some of this vision that you see. But when is the pivot moment? I'm waiting for it.
So I think two things are going on here. One is the technology is just rapidly improving. And we saw ChatGPT take the world by storm almost exactly a year ago when 3.5 got released. It shows you how far the technology is moving in terms of understanding humans. The second part, or even the preceding part, is getting the transcription right. So for voice to be good, you need to do two things. One is you need to be able to understand the words a human being is saying, and then you have to understand what they mean. And the transcription piece people have been working at, literally for 60, 70 years. It has made a lot of progress. It is still not perfect. We can still dictate to Siri and it's imperfect, but it is going to get better and better because they're going to apply the Gen AI technologies to actually interpreting what you said or looking at the words that we think you said and making sure that it's highly likely that those are the words you actually said. And then the second piece is, which I think we all get now that we're messing around with ChatGPT, is that it's going to get much better at interpreting what we mean. That's one piece, the technology. The second piece, which I think is even more important, is how voice is used and the actual user experience around it. And the analogy I use is voice today is a lot like AOL was. It's a walled garden around Siri or Alexa, or maybe you could use the BlackBerry analogy. It's going to get broken wide open, like what the internet did to AOL or what the iPhone did to BlackBerry, where Steve Jobs opened it to developers and all of a sudden the world changed. As this happens, people are going to start understanding that they've completely misused voice for the last 20 or 30 years because they've tried to recreate a conversation between humans, a voice-to-voice conversation. And the core insight was, and we really have spent a lot of time on this in the last few years, we speak 3 times as fast as we type. So we always want to tell the device what to do because it's so much faster. But we also read 3 times as fast as we can listen. And so it's super frustrating to have Alexa or Siri respond to us with voice. The example I use is if you're ordering movie tickets, it's super easy to say, hey, Siri, what movies are playing tonight? Super annoying to listen to 5 different movies with 3 show times each. You and I will remember that as movie phone. That was 40 years ago, 30 years ago at this point. What you really want is to see those movies on a screen where you can just eyeball it super quickly. And then you just say, hey, get me 2 tickets for Star Wars at 8 p.m. And that multimodal is going to be the breakthrough for voice. And we are right here. We started writing this book 3 years ago. I felt like we're Cassandra screaming that something's going to happen. And just over the last year, obviously ChatGPT launched 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago at this point. ChatGPT became voice enabled. DoorDash announced a voice first experience a month ago. And we're in it right now.
You make a great point about not wanting to listen to the Siris or the Alexas. I sometimes hear with this podcast, and I've not actively provided transcripts over the years. I know there's tools today that people can find this podcast on, get a transcript if they want it. But I do get the feedback from people, hey, I just want to read your podcast. Now, I think sometimes that's a little short-sighted because if human-to-human interaction, tone is important, context is important, and that can be lost in a transcription, especially if someone has an interesting voice or an interesting way of emphasizing something. So I've never been a fan of that. But in terms of human to tech or tech to human, oh, you make such a great point. It's so much faster for me if I've got my device in my hand and I ask Siri about the weather, instead of listening to Siri, just quickly show it on my device or something, whatever screen that's up in the living room or whatnot. That's so much quicker than having to listen to one of these robots.
100%. And the screen we think that you're going to use most of the time is the one that's always on, always with you, which is your smartphone. This is a very common issue when new technologies emerge. The first TV shows, essentially broadcasts of either plays or radio broadcasts. If you remember the internet, AOL in the late 90s, if you went to see Time Magazine, it was essentially a PDF of Time Magazine. It takes a long time to really evolve a medium and understand what makes it so good. And our early launch with voice is completely backwards. For example, we call them smart speakers. They should be smart mics because we just want to talk to them. We don't want to listen to them. So the whole paradigm, how voice was launched to consumers, is almost completely backwards of really taking advantage of what makes voice so amazing.
I mean, I guess if it's an option, okay, and we want to show the cuteness of Siri reading back a Wikipedia entry about me, and everyone kind of goes, oh, that's cute. But that's not long-term efficiency. That's not long-term productivity. That's a lot of wasted time.
There are scenarios where you do want to listen to Siri when it's a very quick answer, or in your previous example of podcast, I assume the primary use case there is either driving or working out, or people are doing other things, in which case voice is a great medium. And to your point, it has to listen to things, has power and meaning that a written word might not have. But those are very specific use cases. Most of our interactions with machines, we're trying to get them to do something or convey information through the machine to another human being. And we just want that to be as efficient as possible. And people are smart. Human beings are smart. We're doing it every day. We dictate our text messages, but then we don't want to listen to the text messages being read by Siri and Alexa. We read the response. So the system wasn't designed that way, but we as humans intuitively have figured out that's so much faster than a voice-to-voice experience.
Let me interject something on the precision part of this, just as a thought. Typing is not something natural. I mean, you have to learn how to do it. And I still don't know how to do it, frankly, even though I've written 8 books. I grunt something through. I can get it done and I'm pretty quick at it, but it's not a natural process. However, typing does allow for precision. How do you see, and I know this is a really big question with a lot of different tangential offshoots, but how do you see that issue when it comes to the voice versus the keyboard? Because the keyboard does allow a certain level of precision, which is always going to probably be needed. Or do you see a situation at some point in time where that keyboard that I'm staring at right now will no longer really be a mainstay?
I think that day will come, but it's going to be a 2 or 3 step process. I think step 1 is going to be simple interactions, as is happening right now, are going to get taken over via voice. And they're actually much more complex than you might think. Google released a study 2 years ago, I think at this point, that said there's 2,500 ways in the English language that people set their alarms, right? 2,500 turns of phrase that they've discovered. And so it just gives you a little bit of the idea of how complex it is to, even for very simple commands, what could be simpler than set my alarm for 8 a.m. or in my case with kids, 5:30 a.m. But the complexity is going to be heavily solved by generative AI, which is that understanding layer, because generative AI, much more than the previous techniques of logic, trying to type, what we've been doing for 30 years is trying to figure out every possible way that someone might want to set an alarm and tell the device, this means set the alarm. With generative AI, it kind of figures it out on its own. That's the big breakthrough in terms of the understanding. So step 1 is simple commands, simple issues, simple customer service issues, simple things like ordering pizza, which again, Domino's says there's well over 1 billion combinations of pizza that you can order from them. So it's not, ordering pizza to you and me seems super simple. Not that simple from a technology standpoint, but that's going to be step 1. All those interactions, rebook my flight, all those kinds of things going to happen. Step 2 is going to be more complicated customer service interactions, as an example. And then, or with your doctor, that instead of your doctor typing in everything you're telling him or her while you're visiting, it actually gets transcribed real time and the system is giving him or her suggestions about what might be wrong with you, or et cetera. Step 3 is going to be long form content. And again, we have this huge advantage. We can speak so much faster, but the way that's going to happen is, again, the generative AI is going to take the first shot as you're speaking of making it precise, of making it perfectly formatted. And it might get 80% there, 90% there, but net, it's still going to be so much more efficient than typing everything. Now, it's going to be a mindset change because you write a lot of books. I just have written one, but you get into a certain flow and you're just used to the typing thing. But the next generation, I mean, my kids, they only use voice and they're going to learn how to deploy that tool in ways that you and I probably will never learn.
There is an issue there, though. You know this, having just written a book, you start to see the words on the screen. Then you want to make edits. Will you be able to make edits faster with your fingers versus the spoken word to make the edit? That's going to be an interesting issue. One other thing I was thinking about too is I live in an Asian country and language is a barrier. Likewise, what we were talking about a second ago with the giving Siri the command and getting the text back. I think it's going to be similar with languages too, because if you are speaking with someone who does not speak your language, okay, I want to speak English because I can say it a lot faster that way. But they're going to be able to read the translation a lot faster than having to listen to their device give them the audio translation of what I just said.
So there's a couple things going on there. One is just the translation aspect, and it's moving towards real time. I mean, it'll never be obviously exactly real time, but it's getting closer and closer. It has incredible implications for things like customer service, where in theory, you can use customer service agents that don't speak English to service English-speaking customers.
I tend to think that's already happening.
Yeah, well, it's semi-happening. It's not happening as well as we want it to. But to your point, it's going to allow people very quickly to communicate directly with folks. The other part of that is accessibility. There's over 1 billion people on the planet that still are illiterate that will now have access to the digital world. You know this better than most. There are literally thousands of languages in India, as an example. Many of those speakers don't speak English, but will now again have access to the world as those languages get pulled in. Now, some of the smaller languages, it's going to take more time to pull them in to these systems. It's interesting, in Asia, the voice adoption is much faster than in the West because it's just more complicated to type. The alphabet is less easy to type into screens. And so there's even a bigger benefit of being able to speak and have the system transcribe what you're saying versus languages like English. So all that's happening very, very quickly at this point.
You should be with your book and not too far away. And some of my back catalog books, when these get converted to audiobooks, you're going to experience this process probably if you have not already. But okay, you publish a book in English, and then the foreign publishers think, well, I want to buy the rights to that. And Japanese buys the rights, and Korean buy the rights. And then they typically, at this point in time in history, they will put out a text-based Japanese version or a text-based Korean version. They're not doing foreign audio translations yet, foreign audiobooks yet. I mean, that is huge because all of a sudden it really makes myself, not just having audiobooks or regular books, having to wait for these translations. It becomes instantaneous, frankly, if it's done right. Am I crazy?
With the translation, which is conversational AI, but also the generative AI of actually creating content. I don't know if you heard 2 weeks ago, because so many books are being basically written by generative AI right now. Amazon has attempted to crack down on that practice. So they have limited the number of books an author can publish to 3 books a day.
I mean, I get it.
That's the crackdown.
These are like the search engine optimization guys taking it to steroids on crack cocaine. There's good and bad. And that is going to be part of the problem. So many times these days, I'll turn on a YouTube video and I literally will turn it off when I realize it's bot reading to me because it's something about it that it doesn't do it for me yet. At some point in time, and I know you're going to tell me this, I probably will not know.
We could spend an hour on that topic alone. This concept of trust, of what makes us trust new technology and a new experience. Voice has gotten it wrong a couple ways. I think we've already hit the point of cognitive trust. So human beings trust things in 2 ways. One is affective trust. Do I like it? And that's a judgment that often happens in a couple seconds. And then the second, longer term trust is cognitive trust, meaning does this thing or person do what they say they're going to do over time, which is much more important in the long run. Voice failed the second test because we didn't engineer in a way where it was super efficient in terms of the multimodality that we were talking about earlier. But it also failed the first test in terms of effective trust because we tried to make it too human-like. And there's a concept that was actually developed in Japan in the 1970s called the uncanny valley, which figured out that the more human-like a robot was, the less likely we as humans were to trust it. There's lots of theories as to why that is. It's a proven theory at this point. They've proven it all kinds of ways. And one example is the movie Polar Express, which was very human-like characters everyone was weirded out by, whereas no one's weirded out by the Flintstones or Bugs Bunny because you know that they're not human. But we think it's a corpse, we think it's a zombie, whatever, et cetera. We've been doing the same thing with voice. We've been trying all these bots. People have been trying to make them more and more human-like. And the data is suggesting that the more human-like they are without being human, the less we actually trust them because we feel like we're somehow being misled. In a multimodal world, you obviously know you're not dealing with a human. If you ask your app to book you a movie or get you new car insurance, and it responds on the screen with a quote, you're not equating that to a human experience. And so your trust level strangely goes much higher than if someone had responded to you in a quasi-human voice, giving you the same quote.
It is fascinating. I want to bring up something about another aspect of trust. Curious your point of view on this. Quite a few people have made the mistake of saying the wrong thing on some social media platform, typically in text. Maybe people have been caught doing something crazy on video and whatnot, but they've said the wrong thing on text and it's come back to bite them months, years later. I do have in the back of my mind this moment in time of adoption, that if I say too much in front of the Siri or the Alexa, even if I'm a good person, or I like to think of myself as a good person, I'm not doing anything untoward or illegal, but to leave too many tracks, so to speak, doesn't seem like something, at least for this particular guy asking you questions. I don't like that feeling at this moment in time because I don't know where that voice is going to go, who's going to use it, and for what purpose. Okay, I can imagine, not unlike my surfing habits on Facebook or Twitter, they're going to hit me up with ads. But you're losing something personal when they start to have your voice and they have voice records. And a lot of people are going to screw up and say a lot of the wrong things. And they're going to be caught. And then it's going to come out. And that's going to be messy. How do you see all that?
Again, the industry has had a lot of missteps. And I think Amazon famously later admitted that they were tracking and recording most of what people were saying in and around Alexa. They never admitted that they used it for anything other than research, but I've heard so many stories by very trustworthy, reputable people that would tell me they were talking to their spouse about a vacation they were interested in taking. And the next time they went online, they all of a sudden started seeing ads for that particular destination, which freaks people out. And maybe there were other reasons that the system picked up that they were potentially interested in that vacation, but there's just a lot of stories of that. And Amazon admitted that they were using the voice data. I think transparency is absolutely critical. I think that the techniques on how long you store that, and basically having a policy that we don't store anything unless you as a user have clearly indicated that you want us to, I think is really important. This is also one of the reasons, Michael, that we believe that most of the voice interactions are actually going to not be between us as users talking to Siri and Alexa, which are these that overlay everything. Again, a little bit analogous to AOL, but instead we're going to speak directly to our apps and only when we want to speak to those apps. And I think that's much more analogous to post AOL, where you spent most of your digital time on specific websites. And the way it's going to work is we're going to have these mic buttons that appear in every app. You can see them now in Waze, you can see them in Spotify, they're going to be everywhere. And when you want the system to listen to you and to talk to you, you hit the mic button, and then there'll be policies like what is retained, what's not retained. But you have control over when your voice is being listened to by the system, because you have a very simple control, mic on or mic off in an app. That also solves the discoverability problem. One of the big problems with voice right now is you don't know what Alexa can do. You don't know if you can pay a bill through Citibank because you don't know necessarily, without having tested it and messed around with it, if Citibank is connected to Alexa or how to even log into Citibank via Alexa. Super annoying, complex as a user. If you just pull up the Citibank app, which is very fast, always on your phone, hit the mic, say transfer money, boom, you're done. We think that's going to be the much more likely experience.
this ability to communicate with machines 5 to 10 times faster, as you say. And just a simple little anecdote from my perspective. Okay, if I use an Apple TV and I want to search something on YouTube, I talk 99% of the time. I'm not doing the old tap, tap, tap like pre-iPhone. But when I was just back in the States and seeing some family members and seeing some of the devices they have, it is quite amazing that here we are. We have, and I'm not saying Apple's all that, and other companies have the same kind of tech, but the fact that we do have these devices right now that allow you to search with tremendous accuracy. There's no testing my voice or anything like that. It's hold the button and say what I want, and it brings it up. But what's quite amazing is to see that so many people are not aware yet they can leave the old tap, 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 one letter at a time search on their devices. It's quite amazing. I'm talking about more the TV-like devices, not the iPhone in particular.
I have a story in the book that a few years ago we flew JetBlue, which for a long time had the best TV experiences. And I asked them, hey, how'd you like having live TV, et cetera, on the flight? And my kid said, yeah, I thought it was pretty annoying. They had these channels that you had to navigate through. You couldn't just tell it what you wanted to watch. So that's the next generation.
No one wants to waste time. The kids know they're wasting time.
Yeah.
Let me take it back to a word that I brought up early on in this conversation, which is pivot. I want you to give some color. I want you to give some vision of what the pivot's going to be. Here we are describing me in my rudimentary fashion, some of the things that I've seen so far. But give me the pivot. And what is the pivot and when will it happen? When will be the moment where we all go, oh, wow. The oh, wow was the first time we used a browser. The oh, wow was the first time you used a browser on an iPhone. What are the other oh, wows that we've seen? I mean, email was an oh, wow for the first email use. So what will be the oh, wow moment with voice tech and when will it happen?
I don't know that we will have an oh, wow moment because we may have already had our oh, wow moment with voice the first time we were able to use Siri or Alexa and it worked and did something. And it was a little oh, wow moment. It wasn't a life-changing oh, wow moment, maybe with the way we felt when we first got the iPhone. I think this may be a little more gradual and we will wake up in 1 or 2 years, not that far along from here. And every app that we deal with will be voice first. Every website will be voice first. And we will not have realized that this change engulfed us overnight. I think that's the overall thing. I think in specific professions, in specific areas, there will be those moments. And so I think an example is airlines. What do pilots do at the end of the day? They have to interact with a machine, a very complicated machine. The 737 MAX Boeing accidents were because the pilots couldn't tell the machines what to do. They didn't know what was going on with the airplane. Since then, even before then, but certainly since then, a lot of work has been done into voice commands because why on earth should pilots be using fingers to type into screens or to move knobs? They could just be telling the system what to do. And that's not fantasy. The U.S. Air Force has voice-first cockpits. The Russian Air Force has voice-first cockpits. And so I think the big breakthroughs might not be so much as consumers. It'll be something in your work or your job where you're like, holy crap, my job just got a whole lot easier because of this voice-first system that got installed.
As I said, what's going to be the oh, wow factor? I was thinking about age. How many kids today, if they pick up an iPhone at whatever age they first pick it up, their oh, wow is going to be different than our oh, wow.
My son, he's a big Dallas Cowboys fan. And last week they were playing on Sunday night and he's 10. So I told him he had to go to bed at halftime. He threw a giant tantrum and he ran into the kitchen and he walked up to Google Assistant and said, hey, Google, what boarding schools are there for sixth graders? And Google Assistant replies, Worcester Academy. And Max's name says, hey, Google, complete my application to Worcester Academy.
He's ahead of Google because Google can't do it yet.
Yeah, Google cannot do that yet. But that's the world that he's growing up in, is that he doesn't understand why anything wouldn't, when he's in the car, he's like shouting commands at the car. A Tesla does pretty well. You can do a lot of stuff with voice. Other cars will catch up. But why do you need to be fiddling with all these buttons to get the temperature that you want?
I tell you, though, you use those examples and it brings me back to my privacy and trust issues, though. And maybe the younger people are not going to care. Maybe we have some experience that will be useful in the sense that we should care about it, but maybe the younger people are going to go into it head first, and maybe they won't care about it till some point later in life where they go, oh, shoot, they used my voice in a way that I didn't want. Or maybe none of it's going to matter because there's not going to be any privacy.
I think the latter might be the more likely outcome, because when I think about teenagers and kids in their early 20s, their privacy issue is not what Siri and Alexa or any voice experience is stealing from them. Their privacy issue is what are they posting on TikTok and other social media, and the amount of information that they are comfortable sharing just boggles my mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. In that same headspace, let's keep it at safety for a moment. I would love for you to lay out some of the big picture reasons why you see a voice leading us to a safer society.
There's two areas. One is we're talking about the airline pilot example. It's wherever human beings are interacting with machines is usually where things go sideways. The Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico is another example where literally over days, that accident was a slow-moving train wreck, and the human beings that were involved just couldn't figure out how to turn off the system. In retrospect, there were multiple places that the whole thing could have been avoided. Afterwards, some researchers at Stanford, some PhD students came up with a voice control system for those oil rigs where it would have been a much more fail-safe way to approach that problem. That's one example.
What about crime? Do you see anything on the crime front?
There's a whole category of where voice is active in law enforcement and in any profession where the term of art in the industry is eyes up, hands on. So anything that you're doing where you have to be looking at the world around you and you need your two hands to be doing something else. Law enforcement's an obvious example where you don't want people on their iPhone while they're engaging with a suspect or walking through a scene or whatever it is. Those experiences are so perfect for voice-first interactions. It's very common. They've been integrating it into warehouses where, again, you want your team members, when they're not robots, to be highly focused on the world around them. Same with manufacturing lines. A good example in terms of that I can give is Cathay Pacific Airline. When they turn around an airplane, they've got 8 minutes to turn the plane, to clean the plane. When the cleaning crew goes through, they're using their hands to pick up everything. They're trying to go as fast as they can. If they notice something that's broken, like a broken seat back, today they have to take out their app, log in. It takes about 5 minutes end to end. And when you're trying to clean a plane 8 minutes, 5 minutes is crippling. They now have a system today that allows them real time as they're going through the plane to register a problem. And so that's not necessarily safety, but it gives you an example of why this eyes up, hands on focus is so critical for safety in so many different ways.
If I switch to something else, like using voice in the consumer world, it sure seems like to me, if I had to look ahead, that far less people, let's say folks that have less education or less skill, but they can handle customer service, seems like those folks are going to be less needed in the future. But I can imagine there will probably be more folks needed on the STEM side, more advanced degrees, engineering mindsets to do some of this back office work to get all this voice stuff to work. How do you see that? Because I guess there's always a moment with technology where people will say, well, gosh, we're going to get to a much higher unemployment. There's going to be less people employed. How do you see this unfolding for the front line of workers? Now, look, I'm asking this question from an entrepreneurial seat. Okay, so the way I look at it is I got to wake up every day and go kill it. I've never been too sympathetic to the job mindset, but it does seem like this type of tech could have an effect on jobs, both positively and negatively.
What we've learned in the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution is all these technologies, as they advance, they typically cause a net increase in employment because there's a net increase in demand, there's a net increase in opportunity. Entrepreneurs figure out ways to build new companies and create new value. So I'm confident that the invisible hand will continue. But there will be dislocation, as there always is. I think what we've learned in the last 20 or 30 years is that dislocation is real, and there's been a backlash against globalism because of that. And I think we just have to be conscious of it. You're exactly right. Tech, and this trend's been going on relentlessly for 30, 40 years. STEM jobs, tech jobs are going to be more in demand. You need conversational designers, you need prompt engineers. Those are two job titles that didn't really exist 2 or 3 years ago. And there's tens of thousands of those job listings right now just in the United States. But frontline jobs are going to go away. McDonald's, as an example, has launched experimentally voice first ordering, both inside the McDonald's and in the drive-through. And they're going to need fewer people. Now, one of the reasons they're doing it is they can't hire anyone right now. But theoretically, there will be job reductions in things like customer service as it gets better and better. None of this happens overnight. The law is always, we overestimate the technology changes in the short term, but underestimate them in the long term. So people right now are saying, hey, by next summer, there's going to be no more customer service reps. It's just not going to happen. But in 5 or 10 years, we might have 50 or 70% fewer than we do today. But we're also, during that time, have increased a lot of other jobs. And I think as where we always screw up as a society is we're not fast enough on the education side, making those new skill sets available for people to learn in the education system, whether it's a community college system or the university system or high school. We're just way incredibly behind on that. When I talk to universities, they just started having Android and iOS software development as classes in the last 3-4 years. That trend happened 15 years ago at this point. So that's really where the velocity of change needs to accelerate.
By the way, it seems like the order kiosks that currently exist in so many McDonald's, those seem to appear overnight to me. I'm not a big McDonald's eater, but they appear to be overnight. And I will counter your thought on education. Fair point. But my counter would be, if a kid really wants it bad, and doesn't care how they get that education, there's MIT classes for free online. The internet's got more information than we can stuff a sock with. There is something to be said for the old school way of if one really wants it, it's there. Now, if one wants to go through the typical systems that you and I have all come to know and love over the years and want those systems to respond quickly, that's always been the great look. I know you're probably in a similar headspace in the sense that your career has always been about what's the opportunity, what's going on, and you taking action, not necessarily waiting for someone to come along and say to you, hey, here's the opportunity, or hey, here's what you need to learn. I'll guarantee you've been on the front line.
A great point. We could discuss this.
That's a long conversation.
But you're 100% right. If you want it, there are resources there have never been before in history, because you can basically access every Stanford, MIT, and Harvard class that you want for free or close to free. It is 100% correct. I think we could spend a lot of time thinking about, well, why don't people do that?
Well, we know the answer because a lot of people are more motivated by the credentials, the piece of paper, than they are the actual knowledge, which unfortunately is part of society, because a lot of society will say to these young kids, hey, do you have the right degree from the right university? Oh, we'll hire you, versus do you know what we need? That's unfortunate.
One of the most exciting things when we started this company in 2009, 10, we were 3 or 4 folks. We hired a guy who was delivering pizzas, but he was on the side fixing computers in his neighborhood. He was like 22, 23, but he'd gotten super into iPhone app development when it opened up, and he showed us what he built, and we were blown away, and we hired him, and he's one of our top guys today.
Bingo.
Not a college graduate, but extraordinary at his craft. But the crazy thing is, when we get a government contract, we can't put him on it because they require a college degree in computer science, even though he would kick the crap out of 95% of the people that he would be up against that have the college degree.
Having grown up in the DC area, don't get me infuriated. Was it Peter Thiel that said it's the only place that you can go in America, that DMV area, where people will tell you about their grades when they were in 6th grade? It's very unfortunate. Let me take it to inclusion and how you see this, because clearly with voice tech, it's going to allow people that have physical limitations to participate more. I think people can imagine those opportunities pretty quickly. But what other type of inclusion could you imagine? What are some of the ways that you can imagine? Let's say you mentioned India, how many languages in India? What are some of the other ways that you can imagine voice tech allowing inclusion that people might not instinctively or intuitively imagine?
There's obviously, as you say, a ton of stuff around folks that have hard limitations. I know that some of these are easy to imagine, but one of them is completely counterintuitive, which is actually giving a voice to people who can't speak. Well, how does voice technology do that? Because if they can't speak, what's the point of voice technology? It's an interesting trick is that the voice technology will listen to the other person in the conversation. So the caregiver, as an example, and using tools like ChatGPT, we interpret what the caregiver is asking, and then we will use an app to create likely responses from the person who can't speak. For example, with ALS, they might only be able to move their eyes, and they can look, and we can use eye tracking that's in the iPhone and in the Android devices and see what response they want to come back with. So if you ask someone, what TV show do you want to watch? And you can look at the history of what they've watched in the past, and you give them suggested answers, and they look at, oh, I want to watch Jeopardy. All of a sudden, you've allowed someone to have a conversation, whereas today the tools they have to communicate are they have to look at one letter at a time. So communication is extraordinarily painful. So that's a very non-intuitive way that voice technology can actually give a voice to people who don't have a voice, strangely enough. I think there's a lot of bias mitigation that is going to happen, especially with things like customer service, controlling accents, et cetera, or just making accents more understandable. So if you're calling into customer service and someone has a very strong accent, A, it's just harder to understand, but B, there's a natural human bias. Like, does this person get me? Do they understand me? And so mitigating that, I think, is going to be a really, really powerful mechanic. I think the language thing cannot be understated. We're at a time where the Middle East is on fire again, as an example, and so many of the issues that happen in conflict are due to the fact that people on the ground, not the leaders even, but just people day to day, can't communicate very well with each other. Hopefully, these technologies allow some of those day-to-day interactions to happen in a way that is just much more fluent and elegant and productive.
I think when you bring that issue up, I happen to wear glasses, not my whole life, but I have for the last 10 or so odd years. But if one can have some of this tech, especially on the language side, because when you encounter someone else and you both instantly realize you don't have a way to communicate, okay, we can go to our devices and I can pull up Google Translate. But if there was a way, wearing glasses or some other piece of tech that didn't require you in the moment, at the exact moment, to have to start to do something, to have to look at a screen, to have to type, if there was a way that it could happen naturally with voice-assisted technology, that would be wonderful. For example, if you spoke only Russian and I walked up to you and I started speaking English, whether you've got an earpiece in or some other piece of tech, that you would know what I'm saying immediately. That's the golden goose right there, isn't it?
That's exactly right. We're not going to be too far from it. I was in Poland over the summer and I was in an Uber and I was basically 70% there of your vision in terms of speaking into Google Translate and then using the voice function to have Google Translate speak to the driver. And so it wasn't real time yet. It was a little choppy. It wasn't perfect, but you could see where this was going.
The book, The Sound of the Future, The Coming Age of Voice Technology. Great stuff. I appreciate you coming on and giving me some education, giving my audience some education and some opportunity to imagine what's next. Because like I said at the top, living in an Asian country, man, if I could just solve this language issue, because sitting down in classes and trying to learn, for example, Vietnamese, my older brain is not there yet, but if I could just hack it,
We're almost there.
Hey, where's the website we can send people? The book on Amazon, all that fun stuff, but where's the best place to send people if they want to come check your firm out, check you out? Where should they go?
There's a couple places. One is LinkedIn, Tobias Dengel, TOBIASDENGEL. I'm the only one of that name in the world right now on LinkedIn, so that's easy. You can also find a URL of the same name, tobiasdengel.com, or at my company, WillowTreeApps.com.
Tobias, cool stuff. Best of luck. We'll have to connect when I'm in. Were you a UVA graduate?
I was not, but I was up in DC. My wife went to medical school there and then did her residency here, and we loved it. So we stayed down here in Charlottesville.
So my nephew is on the football team at UVA, and we're hoping he's going to get some playing time at some point in time. He's young, he's skinny. He needs to get some beef on him still. So we'll see.
If you ever come visit him, my kids love UVA football. So hopefully we'll have a better year next year.
Yeah, it's a little rough this year. I hear about it quite a bit. Yeah, it's a beautiful part. I got to tell people, it is a beautiful part of the country. You might be thinking to yourself, Central Virginia, what's there? Well, you got to go. That's all I have to say. It's quite nice. Tobias, great stuff. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Michael. Loved it.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.